I'd like to begin today by making a claim. Now, my claim is that we like problems. And what I mean by that is that you like the trouble that people create for you, and I like the trouble that people create for me. We like our conflicts. We like our problems. That is my claim. You might say, but that's absurd. I mean, who in their right mind would like conflict, for example, or problems? And I'd agree with you. No one in their right minds likes this. But that leaves another possibility. It leaves the possibility that perhaps we're not always in our right minds. Okay? And I'd like to explore that with you tonight. So I want to give you an example of this. So some years ago now, there was a gentleman who came through one of our courses. And he told us a story about his boy. And he says, I'm so bothered about this kid. He's 16. I don't trust him. He's got friends I don't like. He's making poor decisions. And he says, just 2 weeks ago, he asked, it was a Friday, and he asked if he could borrow the car. Well, I didn't want to lend it to him, he said. But I also didn't want to seem like I was just mean-spirited. So what occurred to me in the moment was I'll attach some really early curfew time for a Friday night that he couldn't possibly accept. So what he said was, this father, he said, okay, you can borrow the car if you're home by 10:30. Okay, look, we've all been 16 before. How hard is this, actually, right? So of course, the boy says, yeah, sure, Dad. Takes the keys, and he's out the door. And the one thing Dad knows for sure, he said at this point, is he's not going to be home by 10:30. And that just made him all the more upset. And he stewed over this all night long and thinking about all the problems that his son has. And particularly as it started to get close to the bottom of the 10:30 hour, he kept checking his watch frequently, until finally he resolved within himself, he says, this is it. It's the line in the sand. He's never going to use the car again. That's it. And no sooner had he resolved that within himself than he heard a squeal of tires into the driveway. He looks at his watch. 10:29. His son had made it. Now here's the question. Do you think this father was happy? You know what's interesting about that? We all know that he wasn't, right? Which means we've been this father before in our several circumstances. Well, why wasn't he happy, you might say? Because look, if you'd asked him all night long what he wanted most, he would have said, I want a boy who's responsible, who does what he says, etc. But isn't that exactly what he got? Then why, if he got what he wanted, why isn't he happy? And the answer to that question I would submit to you is, there is actually something that he wanted more than that he just wasn't aware of at the time. That he was being driven by a particular need that was causing all kinds of problems between himself and his boy. So what's this need? Well, in order to get inside this need, I want to take you back about 100 years, and we'll think about a philosopher by the name of Martin Buber. Now, Buber observed that there are a couple of very different ways of being with other people. One way of being, well, he made this distinction. He said, basically, we can see others as people that count like we count, that have the same value that we have. Let's say they have the same legitimacy that we ourselves have, or not. Less than us, for example. So in the former case, I might notice that others have hopes and dreams and cares and fears, and they're as legitimate as mine, and I ought to be thinking about them and honoring them. In the latter case, others, if they have hopes and dreams, they don't really matter to me, not really. And others are more likely to be obstacles in my way, for example, not people. They're more likely to just be vehicles for me to use for my purposes, perhaps. Or maybe they'll just be irrelevant to me. Or perhaps scenery. I might like him as scenery, but that's about it. That might be another option if people are just objects. Well, now, if you think about this distinction then, you might ask this question. You might say, well, okay, fair enough, but why does this matter? And I would submit to you a couple things. First of all, I would say, I believe it matters a whole lot to other people how we see them and how we regard them. Would you agree? And as well, for example, this son, for example, it mattered to him how his father saw him, right? But more than that, I would say it matters tremendously to ourselves how we see other people. And why is that? Well, it's because this choice, like all choices, comes with a consequence. And how I like to think about it is sort of in this way. if I choose to see another person as an object, I purchase with that choice a certain consequence. And what I end up purchasing is a need. I purchase a need that I didn't have the moment before. And that need is the need to be justified for seeing this person as an object. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, let's go back to this story with this father and son to get a feel for it. So this father, what had he been doing all night long? He'd been blaming his boy, right? And so in order to be justified for blaming his boy, what did he need most? He needed a boy who was blameworthy, right? So now let's think about this. Let's get creative for a moment, because although the boy got home at 10:29, there still are some ways that we could make him out to be wrong in this story, right? Let's think about a few. Couldn't he say, grill him about squealing the tires, for example? Responsible kids don't do that. How about filling the car up with gas? Did we do it? Right? How about, you probably had to speed to get home, didn't you? Right? I mean, there are a number of ways he could grill his boy. He chose a fourth way. This boy comes in, 10:29, and says, "Made it, Dad." And this had the potential to be an amazingly beautiful moment, a healing moment, right? But we tend not to have healing moments when we're driven by a need to be justified. So what the father said was, he said, "You sure cut it close, didn't you?" Right? You sure cut it close. Well, there's a tremendous cost that comes with this issue of justification. One of those costs is this. When we have a need to be justified, we actually value problems more than solutions, and we value conflict over peace. Now I want to push this forward a little bit, and we'll see how this plays out in terms of costs. So let's imagine for a moment that we all here together work in the same company. We're all colleagues, okay? And let's imagine, actually, this front row is actually my work team, and we work together a lot. Sir, what's your name?
Jeff.
You're Jeff, okay. Thanks for having an easy name. Okay. So let's say, I work with Jeff, and let's just imagine that this is the scenario. That I have a sense to share a piece of information with Jeff, okay? It's helpful to me, this information, and it's likely to be helpful to him. It'll be good for the organization if I was to share it. But let's imagine further that I don't, okay? Now, think about this for a moment. In this moment, where I've now decided I'm not going to share this information with Jeff, think about this need now. Now I have this need to see Jeff in a way that justifies my not sharing the information. Do you see that? So what'll happen, and I don't have to think about this, it's going to happen naturally. The moment I've gotten myself into this need, what'll happen is any fault that Jeff might have will become inflated in my mind. Because that gives me justification, right? Any of virtues that Jeff might have, they'll sort of recede back into the shadows. And so I won't be seeing Jeff as a person any longer, but rather I'll be seeing him as a kind of caricature that justifies me. I think I'm seeing Jeff, but who I'm really seeing is I'm seeing who I need to see in order to justify me, right? Well, so let's play this out and see what might happen. So I'm likely now, I might think as I'm thinking about Jeff, I might think, you know, Jeff's really quite a lazy person. Because if he wasn't lazy, he'd have this information already, right? And then I might think, and Jeff's not sharing information with me. I mean, he's keeping things to himself. You can't really trust Jeff, right? Sorry, Jeff, but you. And so on. Now, if I'm seeing Jeff in these sorts of ways, imagine now, so what am I likely to do? Well, I'm now likely to keep the information to myself, right? I feel fully justified in doing this. I'm likely to start criticizing Jeff, perhaps ignoring him, avoiding him, not involving him in things that I otherwise might. But let's play it forward to Jeff. What's the impact on Jeff? Well, what I'm giving to Jeff is I'm giving him all kinds of reason to see me as mean, selfish, difficult to work with, right? And if he needs to be justified himself for seeing me as an object, I give him easy pickings for justification, don't I? And if he takes that invitation and goes into the same box of justification that we've been discussing, then now he's likely to do other things that what? That I don't like. Do you see that? I'm actually inviting Jeff to do things that I don't like, which sounds like insanity, unless we understand what's actually driving it beneath the surface, which is I have this deep, deep need to be justified, right? Now think about it. So now let's expand back out to the whole group. So we all work together. What is one of the ways I can gather additional justification now in my battle against Jeff? It's with all of you, right? I mean, I can go over, I'll come and I'll start to talk to all of you and I'll say, you're not going to believe what Jeff said yesterday. I mean, it's unbelievable. If I didn't hear it myself, I wouldn't think he would have said it, right? Well, of course, Jeff's doing the same thing, and so I'm gathering in folks and inviting them into their boxes, and he's gathering in other folks and inviting them into theirs. And here we have a picture of, to one degree or another, what every organization in the world looks like. To one degree or another, we get motivated by this need to be justified, which keeps all of our creative energies in that case from being devoted to the purpose of the organization, serving others, right? Helping others, collaborating with one another that we can serve more effectively, etc. It's also what families can look like. And it certainly is what our politics can look like. And we see this on the world and the global arena, don't we? In fact, 2 or 3 years ago, I was with a particular world political leader, and he said something to me that was really interesting. He said, Jim, you've got to understand, we and our enemies, we're perfect for each other. Because each of us gives reason to the other never to have to change. Do you see that? Right? Because we mistreat them, which gives them cause. If they hop in the box, they can easily get in this box and they can mistreat us back. And then we can point to that and say, well, see, we're not making this up. They're just as bad as we said. And so we complain about the suffering that we have. And yet what we're blind to is we value the innocence we find in that suffering. And we continue to perpetuate it. Well, where does that leave us? Well, I wanted to talk about today this idea of resolving the heart of conflict. Well, it turns out that the heart of conflict, the very core of it, the center of it, is that our hearts have come to find advantage in conflict. And unless and until we can get ourselves out from this need, this driving need to be justified for seeing our fellow human beings as less than ourselves, as objects, there's no way to resolve conflicts. We can manage them, perhaps, and put fences around the conflicts, but we can't resolve them, and we certainly can't transform them. Now, that might sound like a bit of a downer, that message, except for this. That's what it looks like when we're looking at it from the perspective of, oh, it's the other side's fault. If I think it's always other people's fault, then I'm powerless. I have no responsibility, therefore I have no freedom to sort of be a change agent here. If the fact of the matter is, we're actually involved in problems in ways we haven't before known, it means we can become involved in solutions in ways we haven't before known. And this, I believe, is the core truth, the core powerful point that some of the greatest leaders we've ever known have implicitly understood, if not explicitly. People like Gandhi, for example, people like King, like Mandela. They were committed to seeing their fellow human beings as people. Even, and perhaps even most especially, those who were on, quote unquote, the other side of whatever other divide they might have been. And because they were resolute in that focus, and they were willing to do it no matter what, they ended up transforming the world, right? Well, a couple, 3 years ago, I was with a group in the Middle East, spent 3 days or so with a group of Palestinians and Israelis. And it was amazing, as it always is, how people come together when they see each other. We see each other as we really are. And one of the gentlemen afterwards wrote up his summary of what the event was for him. This is what he wrote. I want to tell you how we discovered a whole world of people that we thought were our enemies. It's a story about how I had been wrong. From around Israel and the West Bank, Palestinians and Israelis gathered to spend 3 days together. We all were worried about how the other side would treat and think of us. We wondered why they were so different and why they were filled with so much hate. But we discovered to our surprise that they were not so different from us at all. They, like us, hope for better days. They too worry about their families and their work. Like us, they want to enjoy life and to dream, to look forward to the evening when Avidor and Odai will sit together on the balcony, for example, laughing about the film they just watched together, to dream about the day that Amir invites us to share hummus at his home in Bethlehem. And that day doesn't have to be far off. What I now know is that we begin to get out of our own and others' way in the very moment we open ourselves to each other's humanity. We have felt like we've needed to see each other as objects in order to survive, when the truth is that our seeing each other as objects is what has put our survival at risk. I opened with a story about a father and a son, and I'd like to close with another story. Quite a different one, though. This father was a park ranger here in the United States. This story happened in 1952. He was stationed in a very mountainous area. He had the home they lived in, and it was a sort of an inclined driveway, and then a road. And on the other side of this road was a canyon, about 100 feet deep, a gorge with a raging river running through it. They'd had a truck, an old truck, all these years that they'd driven, but they'd saved up all their money and had finally purchased a brand new 1952 car. And this boy, too, had a teenage son who wanted to use the car. And so this boy had a date. This first week they had the car, and he came to his father and said, "Dad," and his father was a stern man, knew how to discipline his kids. He came and asked if he could borrow the car for the date, and his father said, "You know, you've been responsible with the truck. Sure, you can take it." So the boy is all excited. He rushes out, gets in the car, starts it up, turns it sort of around, backs out of the driveway, and sort of starts to go. And then he notices that the gas gauge is down on empty. So he stops, he rushes back in the house. His father's in his bedroom, sitting on his bed reading a newspaper. And he says, what do you need? What'd you forget? And he says, "Oh, the car's out of gas. Could you give me some money? I need to go so I could fill it up." And sure, he gives him about $3, which in those days filled the tank. Okay? And so he rushes out now all excited. He exits the home, but there's no car. And all of a sudden, in horror, he thinks, "No, wait, did I put it in park? Did I put on the brake?" And he raced at this point down the driveway, across the street, and looks down in the gorge. And there, 100 feet below him, is his father's smashed up 1952 Plymouth. Now, how do you break that news to your dad? By mail, perhaps, right? Okay? Well, somehow he comes in, and his father was sitting on his bed, as I mentioned, reading the newspaper. His son comes in. And somehow, I don't know how you stammer through this story. The car, it's in the river, Dad. I don't know what you say. But so his dad's here on the bed, and he hears what his son says, and he's just silent. He pauses. And then he takes his hand and turns the corner of the newspaper like this. And he looks at his boy and says, "Well, I guess you'll have to take the truck then." How about that? And so his son did. He went and hopped in the truck to go pick up his date. But he wasn't far down the road when all of a sudden he was overcome by what had just happened. In fact, he had to pull off because he was just bawling. Because here's what he realized. He realized, my dad loves me more than he loves the car. Right? And then he realized a second thing. On this, the very worst day of my life, instead of making things worse, my dad made things better. And that is what we can never do when we're in this box. We don't make things better. We make things worse because we need them to be worse. But all those who have ever really made a difference haven't gone that direction. They've been like this father. The Gandhis of the world, the Kings, the Mandelas, because they allowed their hearts to be moved by the humanity of others, they moved humanity, just as this father moved the humanity within his own family. May it be so with us as well. Thank you.